Hi, welcome back to the channel. My name's Claire and I'm a senior lecturer in physiotherapy. And in this video, I'm going to do a worked example of critical appraisal, which is basically about how we assess the quality of the studies we're going to be including in our review. So, in terms of where this sits with the big picture of the process that you're going through, this is around step 5. So, you're critically appraising the studies that you have included. So let's do a worked example together just so that you can get a better feel for the process that you go through when you're doing this critical appraisal. So, our goal with this critical appraisal, and I've selected this paper, which is a systematic review, and it's on physiotherapy intervention in Parkinson's disease. It's a systematic review and it's a meta analysis. So, what you would need to do is go onto the CASP website and you would need to find the critical appraisal tool that aligns with this study design of it being a systematic review. So, that's the first thing you do. And then, when you've got that critical appraisal tool from the website, you are ready to get going. So, the CASP systematic review checklist has 10 questions to help you make sense of a systematic review, and that is then broken down into 3 different sections. So, that is, are the results of the study valid? What are the results? And will the results help locally? So, you're just going to methodically work your way through these 10 questions. So, the first thing I just want to highlight is really, what do we mean by valid? So, validity is all about how well a piece of research actually measures what it's set out to do. So, I'm showing my age here, but this reminds me of an advert in the 1990s, and it was for Ronseal, and the tagline for it was Ronseal. Quick drying wood stain. It does exactly what it says on the tin. So, if we think about, is a study valid, we're thinking about, actually, does it do what it says on the tin? Does it do what it set out to do? So let's go through those questions one at a time. Section A, are the results of the review valid? Is it Ronseal? Did they do what they said on the tin? Did they do what they were going to be setting out to do? So the first question is, did the review address a clearly focused question? So I'm going to signpost you to some key sections on the paper to help you answer that question. And the best place to start with this really is the abstract. So we're going to have a look at the study objective in the abstract on page 1. So let's have a look and see what that says. So remember, we're thinking about PICO when we're normally looking at quantitative systematic reviews, which is what this is. So we're going to have a look at the objective of the study. So in the abstract, the objective was to assess the effectiveness of physiotherapy compared with no intervention in patients with Parkinson's disease. So the question is, can we actually apply that objective to the PICO framework? So with PICO, we're thinking population. So that would be patients with Parkinson's disease. The intervention would be physiotherapy interventions. The comparison would be no intervention. And then the outcome would be effectiveness. So are the results of the review valid in terms of, is it doing what it set out to do? Well, I would say yes, because they chose studies which matched what they set out to do. I.e., they included studies with a population of people with Parkinson's disease, and they looked at the effectiveness of physio versus comparisons, i.e., no intervention. Now, just a point here. What we are doing here is a very, very simplistic approach to doing critical appraisal. If you were doing something like a Cochrane review, you would not be using these videos because you're going to be working at a totally different level. And I say this because there are layers of learning with research. And so this layer of learning is at that foundational level of research, which is aimed at that kind of first layer of student learning. So I just highlight that what we're doing here is, it's appropriate for this level of learning for you as students. Now we move on to question 2. So did the authors look for the right type of papers? And you'll see on the CASP checklist, they have these hints on the right-hand side in orange, and they can be really helpful for you in understanding, actually, what is this question all about? What are they looking for? So use those hint questions to help. So again, really, we're going back to Ronseal and does it do what it said on the tin, i.e., did the study do what it set out to do by looking for the right type of papers? So let's dig into the paper a little bit and have a look. So you'll see in the design section of the abstract, they say they were going to do a systematic review of randomized controlled trials. And then if you actually look at their study selection with their selection criteria, you will see the types of studies they were looking for. And great, it says randomized controlled trial. And that's what we needed to see because they were trying to include randomized controls randomized controlled trials, weren't they? And then if we look at the results section, so yes, they included studies, they excluded studies that were not properly randomized, but they did include studies that were properly randomized, i.e., randomized controlled trials. So based on this, what it looks like is they did look for the right type of papers. So I think you can answer yes to that question. And then it gets to this question, you'll see it says, is it worth continuing? So if the answers to the previous questions were no, then it's probably fair to say that that was quite a poor quality study, and therefore any results from it probably can't be trusted. So you would probably stop there and you would exclude it from your review. But in this instance, the answers were yes, so we're good to continue. So this next question, question 3, is do you think all the important relevant studies were included? So let's have a look at some of the details in the paper. So this is where we go deeper into the methods section to judge whether we think all the important relevant studies were included. So you need to have a read of the search strategy and the selection criteria select section. And they used a number of ways to try and find studies, including they did electronic database searching. They hand searched relevant journals, i.e. they went through all the papers in that journal to see whether there was anything that they missed. They examined the reference list of identified papers. So to me, that sounds pretty exhaustive. So in that sense, it probably means that all relevant studies were found. So I think it's okay to say yes to that question and then move on to the next one. Question 4 is asking if the review authors did enough to assess the quality of the included studies, which is exactly the process that you are working through with your review, looking at the quality of the papers you have included. So in this systematic review, did the authors do enough to assess the quality? Again, let's dig into the paper and have a little bit of a look. So to answer that, we need to look at the data extraction and quality assessment section. What they did was they had 2 independent reviewers. That's a good thing because you need that for it to be a systematic review. And it says they assessed for methodological quality and gives the ways that they recorded this. So now we need to have a look at the methodological quality section in the results on page 3 to help us answer the question fully. So this section gives a clear summary of the quality of the studies and refers us to table 2 at the end of the paper on page 10. And you can see you have to do quite a bit of digging to try and find the answers to some of these questions on the CASP form or any critical appraisal that you're doing. But they did assess the risk of bias, which is a measure of quality. So really our answer for this question is I think it's okay that they did enough to do that. And again, remember to look at the hint if you need some guidance. Did they do enough to assess the quality? Did they consider the rigor, i.e. the quality of the research process of the studies they've identified? I think yes, they did. So far this is a good paper. We're happy to continue. And now this is where it can start to get a little bit more complicated, and I'm really trying to keep it simple for you. So this question is number 5. If the results of the review have been combined, was it reasonable to do so? So to be able to answer this question, I need to introduce you to 2 terms, heterogeneity and homogeneity. So I've written out what they mean so that you can actually see it as well as hear me talk about it. But they can get quite complicated because researchers will talk about clinical heterogeneity, methodological, statistical heterogeneity. So we're just trying to keep it simple because we just want to know, were the studies similar enough for it to be reasonable for them to be combined in a meta-analysis for that to have been carried out? Now, this principle is really important because a meta-analysis can really only be considered when the studies are sufficiently homogeneous, i.e. they are similar enough in terms of the participants, the interventions, and the outcome for a meaningful summary to be produced. So heterogeneity is any kind of variability among studies in a systematic review, i.e. they're really different. Homogeneity is similarity of the studies in a systematic review. So you want there to be more homogeneity, you want them to be more similar. Now I think I'm just going to step over this because I think you would probably start swearing at me if I tried to go into too much more detail about, how you do this and how you assess it. You need to be looking at I-squared, etc., etc. But the purpose of this video really is to just kind of show you the steps that you go through. So I'm going to step over that. If you want me to go into more detail about that in another video, please feel free to put it in the comments. But for now, let us step over it. And what we're also going to do is then jump to questions 6 and 7 because they are all about the overall results. So, what are the overall results of the review and how precise all the results are the results? And so, this is where you can get a bit of overlap with your data extraction. And that's why I say it's worth doing your critical appraisal and your data extraction on whichever paper you're working through at the same time because you're in the paper anyway. So, you may as well be pulling out all of that relevant information. So, what are the overall results of the review and how precise are the results? So, the main results for this systematic review are in the form of what is called a forest plot. It used to be known as a blobogram, but we tend to call it a forest plot nowadays, and that's because they did a meta analysis. And because I'm worried that I'm going to lose you at this point, I'm not going to go into any more detail around that, but I'm just going to say that's there. You're not going to be doing a systematic review of systematic reviews. You're likely going to be using just primary data. So let us move on swiftly to the next question. So, question 8 asks if the results can be applied to the local population. So, are the patients covered by this review similar to the population that is under consideration with yours? And I think we're going to assume the answer is yes for this. And then question 9 is about if all the important outcomes were considered. So have a look at the abstract for a reminder of the outcomes assessed in the systematic review. And if you're happy that all the important outcomes were included, then you can click yes and you can keep going. And then the last question, question 10, is are the benefits worth the harms and the cost? This question can often be of more relevance if it's a systematic review about drugs where there may have been some side effects. But were there any adverse events? And if you look on page 4, you'll see it talks about adverse events. And it looks like they were not necessarily well reported. So you kind of have to weigh up your answer to that question. But that's question 10. So they are the 10 questions for doing a critical appraisal of a systematic review. So just a reminder on your take-home messages, this can feel subjective. You will see. I mean, this was just a whistle-stop tour, wasn't it? But you had to do really exercise your academic judgment based on your understanding. And if you're not sure, you do have to do quite a bit of digging around in the papers to find the answers. And you may well have to do some reading around research design to be able to answer those clearly. But this is all part of the learning that you're going to go through. So over to you. Give it a go. Work with a friend for moral support. Ask your tutor if you get stuck on some of those questions. Be prepared to dig into the textbooks to understand some of those methodological points. But I hope as a summary overview, that was kind of helpful to see the process that you could go through with one of the papers. I have put the link to this paper that I used in the description below. So if you do actually want to pull out that paper and work along this video using that paper, then please feel free to do so. But I hope seeing that example helped a little bit.